The summer of 1999 was a golden age for 10-year-old twins Leo and Elias Vance. Their world consisted of bicycles, secret forts in the woods, and an unbreakable brotherly bond that only they could understand. Blekwood Forest, which bordered their backyard, was their kingdom, a place of endless adventure. But the forest also had a darker reputation. Old-timers told stories of strange lights, of people who would enter its depths and lose track of time, emerging after what felt like an hour to find a whole day had passed. To the boys, these were just fairy tales that added a thrill to their games. On that fateful August day, they were playing their favorite game, hide-and-seek. Elias was it. He counted to 100, opened his eyes, and yelled, "Ready or not, here I come!" The sun filtered through the dense canopy of trees, creating intricate patterns of light and shadow. Elias searched for a long time. At first he was angry, impressed by how well Leo had hidden. Then his anger gave way to anxiety. The forest seemed to fall silent. The birds stopped singing. The air grew heavy and cold. Elias started calling his brother's name, but only silence answered. He never remembered what happened next. His next memory is of sitting pressed against the trunk of an old oak tree, shivering with cold, even though the day had been warm. His parents found him several hours after sunset. He was alone. Leo was gone. The search lasted for weeks. Hundreds of volunteers, police with dogs and helicopters scoured Blekwood. They found nothing. No signs of a struggle, not a scrap of clothing, not a single clue. Leo Vance had simply vanished into thin air. To the world, he became another face on a missing child flyer. For his family, the world shattered into a before and after. The tragedy didn't just leave a scar on the Vance family. It ripped the soul out of their lives, leaving a cold, ringing void in its place. Their home, which once echoed with the laughter of two identical boys' voices, sank into an oppressive, heavy silence. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the silence of a weight that never ended. Leo's room was left untouched, becoming a kind of shrine. His mother, Sarah, would go in for years to dust his model spaceships and straighten the blanket on his bed as if he were about to return from a walk. Until the very last day of her life, which came 15 years after the disappearance, she refused to believe Leo was dead. Her armchair by the window, which faced the dark wall of Blekwood Forest, became her constant vigil. She sat there for hours, peering into the shadows between the trees, and every time the wind rustled the branches, her heart would stop with hope. His father, David, broke in a completely different way. He couldn't bear the silent waiting. He built a wall of work around himself, leaving the house early in the morning and returning late at night. He couldn't look at Elias. Every time his gaze fell on his son, he saw a ghost. Leo's face, Leo's laugh, Leo's gestures. In one child, he saw both the one he had lost and a living, painful reminder of that loss. Their communication dwindled to short, formal phrases over dinner. Love had vanished, pushed out by a grief that each of them endured in their own impenetrable cocoons of solitude. For Elias himself, life became a never-ending trial where he was both the accused and the judge. Guilt became his second skin. Why him? Why was he found freezing and unharmed, while Leo, his other half, was swallowed by the forest? What happened in those few hours that his brain had completely blocked out? These questions haunted him in his sleep, turning into nightmares where he ran through the forest as his brother's voice grew fainter and fainter. Dozens of therapists and sessions of regressive hypnosis yielded nothing. His memory was like an impregnable fortress, guarding a secret too terrible to be remembered. He grew up constantly feeling the stares of others, a mixture of pity and suspicion. He was that Vance boy. Every birthday was torture. He turned 11, 12, 20, 30, while Leo remained forever 10. He finished school, went to college, met a woman who managed to see the man behind his tragedy, got married, and had a beautiful daughter. He tried with all his might to build a normal life, but he always felt like an imposter, only half of a whole. And every year, on that same August day, he would drive alone to the old house. He wouldn't go inside, but would simply walk to the edge of Blekwood Forest and stand there, staring into its dark, silent depths, asking the trees questions that had no answers. 25 years passed. Leo Vence's case file gathered dust in an archive. The Vence family, which had completely fallen apart after the mother's death, sold the old house. The story of the missing twins turned into a grim urban legend, told around campfires to new generations of children to warn them not to wander too far into the woods. It was a gloomy October day in 2024. One of those days when the sky seems low and heavy, its leaden belly scratched by the bare branches of trees. Elias sat in his artificially lit office, hunched over the architectural blueprints of a new residential complex. The monotonous work helped distract him from the thoughts that had tormented his soul for 25 years. Suddenly his cell phone rang, an unknown number. On the other end of the line was a voice Elias hadn't heard in many years, the voice of the sheriff from their hometown who was just about to retire. The sheriff's voice was strange. It lacked both official dryness and sympathy. It was filled with bewilderment. He asked Elias to come to the station immediately. "Did something happen? Did you find something?" Elias asked, his stomach tightening into an icy knot. He had been preparing for this call for 25 years, ready to hear about remains, about fragments of clothing, about the closing of a case. "Elias, just come," the sheriff replied, and after a long pause, he added a phrase that stripped the world of all meaning. We think we found your brother." The drive to the station took 40 minutes, but for Elias they flew by like a single second in a fog of fear and denial. He entered the building, which smelled of old paper, cheap coffee, and unfulfilled hopes. The sheriff met him at the entrance. His face was pale, and his eyes held the look of a man who had seen a ghost. Without a word, he led Elias down a corridor to a small interrogation room with drab beige walls. Elias peered inside through the wire-reinforced glass in the door. A small boy sat at the table, his back to him. He was wearing faded jeans and a worn-out t-shirt with the Nirvana logo. Elias's heart skipped a beat. Leo had been wearing the exact same kind of shirt, popular in the 90s, on that day. Slowly, as if afraid to scare away an illusion, he opened the door. The boy turned at the sound, and Elias's world collapsed. It wasn't just a similar face, it was his face. The very same face that looked back at him from dozens of childhood photos arranged all over his house. The same brown eyes, the same small scar on his chin from a fall off his bike. The face of 10-year-old Leo, untouched by time. The boy looked at the 35-year-old man with graying temples, at the wrinkles around his eyes, at his tired and tormented expression, and in his childish eyes there was only confusion. Leo's return sent shockwaves across the globe. The news of a boy who had disappeared a quarter century ago and returned without a single sign of aging spread through every news channel. Scientists, journalists, and government agents all tried to solve the mystery. But the key was held only by Leo himself, in his fragmented, dreamlike memories. He explained that after hiding behind a large moss-covered boulder, he felt the ground beneath him vibrate slightly. The air filled with a quiet, melodic music, and the forest around him changed. The colors became brighter, and the light grew softer, like a perpetual twilight. He felt no hunger, no thirst, no fear. It seemed to him that he was just sitting and waiting for his brother to find him. Time in that place flowed differently, or perhaps not at all. He remembered a vague image of something or someone, not a person, but rather a benevolent keeper of the place who communicated with him without words, assuring him that everything was all right and that he would soon be home. He didn't remember how he left the forest. To him, it was as if he had blinked and found himself on the same forest edge, but the world around him was different. He didn't understand why the trees were taller or why an asphalt road now ran where a familiar path used to be. Scientists proposed theories of a temporal anomaly, a wormhole, or a localized distortion of spacetime centered in that ancient forest. Some suggested that Leo might have entered a time loop or a pocket dimension where the laws of physics operated differently. Hypotheses were put forward about the influence of unknown geomagnetic fields, or even contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence. But no theory could fully explain what had happened. How could a child exist in such a state for 25 years and remain unharmed? And who was this mysterious keeper that Leo spoke of? The answers to these questions were yet to be found. For Elias, his brother's return was both a miracle and a grueling ordeal. The joy that Leo was alive was mixed with a profound shock at the chasm that now separated them. For 25 years, Elias had lived with an open wound in his soul, a sense of guilt and an unresolved loss that kept him from moving on. And now, the ghost from the past had returned, but instead of relief, he brought with him new, even more complex questions. How do you explain to your 10-year-old twin brother that their mother is gone? She had died 5 years earlier from an illness, never getting news of her youngest son. How do you tell him that their father is a gray-haired old man with a weak heart living in another city who never recovered from the grief of Leo's disappearance and grew distant from Elias? What are the internet, smartphones, and a world that has fundamentally changed since 1999? For Leo, the world was still analog, and the Twin Towers in New York were meant to stand forever. Leo was trapped. Physically, he was a child, but legally he was a 35-year-old man who had long been declared missing and possibly dead. Re-establishing his legal identity became a bureaucratic nightmare. He was a ghost from the past, frozen in time, while his brother carried the weight of 25 years of life. Elias looked at Leo and saw not only his lost brother, but also his own stolen childhood, his trauma, and the guilt that had tormented him all these years. Leo's social adjustment became a serious problem. He was afraid of noisy streets, didn't understand how to use a touchscreen, and looked with horror at a world that seemed alien and hostile. Children his own age seemed strange to him. They spoke in incomprehensible slang and played games he had never heard of. He was alone in this new world, and his only anchor was Elias, who himself was struggling to cope with the flood of emotions. They stood on the threshold of a new, incredibly complex reality. They had not just to reunite, but to get to know each other all over again, separated not only by time, but by an entire lifetime. The story of their disappearance was over, but the story of their return and their attempt to piece together the fragments of two shattered worlds was just beginning, and its ending was unpredictable. The mystery of Blekwood Forest remained unsolved, an eternal reminder that there are things beyond human comprehension.